A mild topic to talk about today. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Have attention, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead and have your notes out. We're going to be dealing with the right of privacy. Very big, important component of the United States Constitution. Pops up in a number of cases, one of which we've already looked at. As far as the right to privacy, where the Supreme Court said states cannot outlaw consensual adult intimacy. Right? Remember that came up because when we were talking about that in the context of marriage. So even if a state can say, well, these people can't get married based on biological relation or just multiple, numbers and so forth. This intimate stuff that could take place within the respect of a marriage can take place regardless, because the Supreme Court got into that with what was the name? Do you guys know the name of the case? You're going to need to know a lot of names of cases, yes. No, not Griswold. Look further down on that page, or actually, if you look on the sheet that's got the big handout and so forth, it's like the last cases there. Lawrence versus Texas, which reversed a case that was pretty much on the same point, Bowers versus Hardwick. Okay? Anyway, you're going to need to know a bunch of cases. For your information, before we dive into this very interesting topic of the right of privacy, I figured out what I'm going to do with you guys for the rest of the year. Yeah. The last day you guys are here, which is Monday, the 7th of June, right? You're going to have a test in here. It'll be 80 points. It's going to be on Civil Rights Unit. It'll be on the unit that we're doing here. In fact, we're probably pretty much going to be wrapping that up today. And then we've got review for you, which will be next Thursday, so a week from today. We'll review. And I'm like, but there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this. And some of it I'm thinking, like politics, which is a unit that we didn't really quite have time for this year. We'll cover it. It's a shorter unit. We can cover it at the beginning of next year. Okay? And a lot of things, the political types of issues and so forth, percolated all over the place, like the presidential election system. I mean, we kind of had to cover that this year, right? Because did we have a presidential election during this particular school year? No. Did we? No. I can't remember. I don't think we did. Did we? No? Nothing? I can't remember. Yeah. 2018, right? Yeah, 2018. When's the next presidential election? 2024. Who are going to be the major candidates for president in 2024? Your mom. She's an American citizen. That's right, but she's not natural born. Oh, booyah! Your mom. No. Yeah, no. Yeah, enough of your silly accents. So anyway, one of the other units, which was like an IB history unit and so forth, I'm going to take a component part of it because it was the history of the American Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 60s. Martin Luther King Jr. and so forth, very much involved. And I thought, yeah, so sometimes we have time for that. And there's a movie, so I'm going to go ahead and show the movie that's associated with that because it's very, very involved in civil rights. All kinds of voting rights, including equal protection. Voting rights is very, very important to that. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm going to be sharing with you next time, and then on Thursday as well. So next week, we're going to show the movie Selma in here, okay? Which is a really, really good movie. You guys are going to be able to see that and highlight on some of those kind of particular parts. Next year, oh my gosh, we got all kinds of things next year for you. Yeah, American government will overflow, American history, World War I, World War II, all kinds of good stuff. But today, yes, let's get into the right of privacy, shall we? Yes, the right of privacy. All right, now, I'm going to premise this with some things, and this is interesting because we started out early on in this unit talking about judicial activism versus judicial restraint. Two different ways that a court can look at interpreting the law, the Constitution, civil rights, whatever. Which one of those, judicial restraint, judicial activism, has the court being more involved. Activism, okay? And the restraint is sort of like, we're going to stay out of it. We're going to stick strictly to what is written. We're going to stick to like deferring to the elected officials in Congress, the presidency, state and so forth. But it's been fascinating as we've gone along here because sometimes, honestly, I look at these cases and I'm like, I don't know, sometimes I'm a little this and sometimes I'm a little that, right? So for example, Brown versus Board of Education. The Supreme Court said, was segregation okay in schools? No, not okay anymore. Was that an activist decision or a restraint decision? It was activist, some people said, because it's like, whoa, hold on there, Supreme Court. You're getting way ahead of where the country is, especially in the Deep South, as far as racial integration in the public schools. And yet, was that a pretty fair reading of the 14th Amendment? Yeah, it was probably a pretty fair reading. But it's interesting when you look at this. Write this down. Sometimes, and this is very, very important, when the Supreme Court is ruling on these things, they're thinking, all right, where is the public on this? Where are the politicians? Where are we? How are we going to be seen? I'll give you an example. Franklin D. Roosevelt, president, 32nd president of the United States of America, elected by a vast majority in this country, lots of Democrats elected to Congress. The country was in a Great Depression. The Democrats, Roosevelt and others in Congress were like, let's do a new deal, and they enacted all kinds of legislation. And some of that legislation was challenged in the courts as being unconstitutional. And some of those pieces of legislation, the Supreme Court said, hold it right there, that's unconstitutional, you can't do it. Roosevelt was furious. And Democrats in Congress were pretty furious too. And Roosevelt's like, I got a solution, you 9 justices. Let's get more. Right? You read about that. Packing the court. Let's get 4 more justices because then, if I lost a decision in the Supreme Court, now if I add 4 more of my people in there, it's going to come out in my favor. It was really interesting because the Supreme Court is looking and going, uh-oh, they figured out a way to do something other than try to amend the Constitution, which is really hard, or, well, you can't replace the members of the court unless they die or retire, but you can add more positions. Careful. Actually, speaking of the Pelican brief, that my mom was considered for, that was the premise of that, with like 2 justices die mysteriously. It's like, what the heck is going on there? And it actually had to do with some kind of a scheme to knock off justices on the Supreme Court. She wasn't in the movie. No. So in any event, but put this down. People get a little bit nervous about the whole idea of packing the court, adding different positions. And that's been coming up in the last year or two, and it very well may come up again in the near future. A solution to the problem of whatever the Supreme Court did is to put more justices on the court. Now notice this. Roosevelt wanted to put more justices on the court, but the Democrats in Congress decided, let's not do that. Because what comes around goes around. Maybe you could add even more members of the court. And then the court becomes this big, huge judicial legislature that kind of flips and add more and so forth. And yet, put this down, that's one of the criticisms that people have of the court today. That they are making laws instead of interpreting them. Now, if somebody says the court is making laws, are they criticizing it for being too activist or too judicially restrained? Activist, okay. So, where that came up has been very interesting. When we went through the criminal justice rights and, the Supreme Court's ruling, in Gideon versus Wainwright, you have a right to an attorney and, add some words, if you can't afford one, the government will appoint one. Did you have a problem with that one? Okay. How about, did you have a problem with, you've got a 4th Amendment right not to have your home searched without a warrant, and, add some words, if the government does that, we're going to exclude that evidence? You have a problem with that? No problem with that. So those were kind of like added in there to give, according to the Supreme Court, fairness, weight to that. Did you have a problem with You have a right to be informed of certain rights. If you're arrested and you're like, oh no, I'm being arrested, you have a right to remain silent. And if you can afford an attorney, you can get one. And you have a right to an attorney. No problem with that? So, were those cases, Gideon, Mapp versus Ohio, Miranda, activists or restraint? Activists. 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 Okay? And arguably, you could say, well, if you left it up to criminal defendants, they would never be able to get those laws passed in Congress or the states. Okay? So, it's interesting because once you start getting used to, here's the criticism, once you start getting used to, as a court, we'll get involved here, and then we'll get involved here, and then we'll get involved here, and then maybe you get involved in something else, and then people are like, what the heck are you doing getting involved in that? Well, we're being fair. We're the court. If you have a problem with that, I don't know, what can you do if you have a problem with the Supreme Court doing something? This is tough because if the Supreme Court feels like it's gone too far, then you get people going, pack the court, let's put some more people on the court. As a, as one response to it. Put this down, you ready? In the area of right of privacy, you start getting that debate. The right of privacy people will feel very strongly about. Some people really like it, other people like it, but they're like, it's come about the wrong way. What do you mean the wrong way? Well, the Supreme Court are like making it up, or they're finding it. They're being too creative. You're like, what are you talking about? Let's get to the details here, because remember how this works. If the Supreme Court rules in one way once, they might rule in a similar way after that. So if the Supreme Court says, hey, state of Virginia, you can't prevent blacks and whites from getting married, you guys don't have any problem with that, right? And then somebody else comes into the court and goes, well, we're adults and we want to get married too, but our state won't allow us. Says same-sex couples. What did the Supreme Court rule on that? That's covered under the 14th Amendment. Is it possible someday that it's going to be the Supreme Court that will step in and go, well, if there's 3 or 4 or 5 of them in a polygamous situation, they can make the decision too. Do you see that kind of logical play? Whereas if it's just straight politics, it's like, no. Have you ever run into that? You think you make a really good, persuasive, logical argument to a parent, and then they look at you and are like, no. And you're like, could you elaborate on the reasons behind your negative response to me, oh parental unit? If you dare even say that. How many of you guys would never even dare approaching something like that? How many of you guys are like, oh yeah, that's my house all the time. Yeah, we get into a nice, airing of views and so forth. But I mean, it's like politicians, they'll try to come up with all kinds of various different things. Be like, well, that person voted it for that reason and that reason and that reason. Supreme Court has to be, they try to be logical, okay? Which creates some interesting situations. All right. Now let's get to the facts of the Griswold case. Because this is one of those ones that people look at and go, it might have never really had to have taken place. Look at this. This is a key fact. The law that was in question was put in by the Connecticut legislature in 1879. Yeah, sometimes students like to show me, hey, Mr. Hanson, did you know that it was illegal to walk your horse in a park? I'm like, okay. If you look back, there's all these collections of old laws that sometimes you're like, that's just kind of an anachronism. That's just weird. Yeah, but back in 1879, Connecticut had people living in it that you call Connecticuters, but in one sense, they're really not that much like the people in Connecticut today, or even back when the Griswold case was decided in 1965. But this is a huge one, Griswold. And when it was decided, here's a headline in a newspaper, but I think it's a blown-up headline because most people are like, oh yeah, that's stupid. I'm glad the Supreme Court ruled that way because that's just stupid. So what was the law? It basically said no birth control devices could be sold in the state of Connecticut. To anyone, by anyone, for any purpose, period. Got that? Now, this is before the birth control pill was invented, but this is reflective of the majoritarian view in Connecticut, which, if you look at it very carefully back then, Connecticut was populated primarily then by very strongly felt Catholics who believed that if you are going to have an intimate relationship that ultimately could lead to procreation, reproduction, and so forth, then let it happen, right? The best form of birth control practiced by many of the people that were in the majority in Connecticut at that time was abstinence. Yeah, don't do it. Yeah, if you don't want to have kids, don't do it. Plain and simple. And so in the law, they were like, we want to make it illegal for all those other kinds of, and ask Mr. Holliday if you're not sure what all the other kinds of things that can be used as birth control devices and so forth. Okay? Yeah, anyway, because you guys learned that already, right, this year? No, really? Okay. Well, I wonder if the internet has anything. I'm just curious. Anyway, but yeah, that's a rabbit hole. Yeah. Beep, beep, beep. Cookies. Yeah. So anyway, here's the deal. Quickly. What? Oh, just leave them alone. Why?
I fixed them every class, but they're no longer aligned.
No, because they are aligned the way I wanted them to, because I was using them for instructive purposes. That's what I use toys in my classroom for. Instructive purposes. Yeah, and I'll use them next year in 11th grade. Yeah. It's good luck. Oh my gosh! Shh. They're Russian nesting dolls. There's 4 sets, and I've broken them up in different points to make some things. We already talked about that earlier with when we did the Soviet Union, totalitarian government. Yes, remember? Gorbachev, Yeltsin. We haven't got to Khrushchev and Brezhnev. We'll cover them even more next year. Duh. Okay, so here's the deal. The Griswolds, not these people, but some actual people with the last name Griswolds. Mr. and Mrs. Griswold. Notice this. Oh, my gosh. I don't think so. I think he's a different actor. He does look up. Write this down. And this is going to be very interesting because the ruling in this case is very narrow. It's very narrow. It does not apply to all adults in the state of Connecticut. The Griswolds are married to each other. They're a husband and wife. And within the confines of their marriage, they want to have, although it's against the law in Connecticut, they want to have access to purchase things that can help them in family planning as a married couple deciding whether to and how many children to have, things like that. Okay, do you understand that? And the law of Connecticut prevented anyone. Now, what could have happened is the state of Connecticut could have changed its law to allow for married couples and so forth to have access to birth control devices and so forth. Okay? And some states had laws that did allow for married couples to have access to birth control devices, but kept it away from, unmarried people or juveniles. They would keep it away from that. But here's the interesting thing. The law was unamended, and the law was challenged, and the Supreme Court accepted the challenge. And look, the decision was 7-2. The Supreme Court said, here's the easy part. No, Connecticut, you can't do that. You got that? And here's the narrow ruling. No, Connecticut, you can't do that to a married couple that has a legitimate right within a marriage to have access to various different forms of birth control to help them make their family decisions, because that's a legitimate part within a marriage. So says the Supreme Court. Does that make sense? Notice it's not expanded out to all kinds of other groups of people, unmarried and so forth. Nevertheless, once it's been established, it's going to be built upon. Okay? Now, notice this. It's a constitutional right, and they call it the right of privacy. All right, now, I challenge you. Where in the Constitution, now that we've covered the Constitution, and we've covered all kinds of parts of the Constitution in respect to civil rights, where is that? Where is that right of married couples to be able to have access to purchase birth control stuff? 9th? Really? The 9th? Are you going to argue that back in like 1790 there were married couples that had easy access to birth control devices as a practical matter? Good luck with that. No, exactly. Some of that just wasn't even in existence. They were more primitive forms and so forth. I don't think the 9th is going to help you out on this one so much. And in fact, scary, sorry people, if you go back further in history, you will find a profound lack of privacy. I would scare people because I will tell you, like, traditionally, once upon a time in Europe, they would have weddings, and instead of the married couple going off to some private location for their wedding night, they would go into a room outside where the main party was taking place, and they would wait until the married couple had their married activity because they wanted to make sure that that marriage was actually consummated. And you're like, what? Really? Is that how you want your married night to be? You're like, hey, everyone, come on over. It's like, here's the deal. Shh. Here's the deal. Shh. Do you guys how many of you guys like have a room in your home with a door that you can shut and nobody else can come in except for knocking with permission? How many of you guys wish you had that? Right? How many of you guys have to share with a sibling? All right, so that's kind of a problem there. So here's the deal, okay? Historically, there wasn't a sense of some of you guys are like, oh my God, that's crazy. I remember going to like an outdoor museum in like Sweden or something, and you walk in, it was like a recreation of a building that people would live in, like in the 1700s. I'm like, wow, the ceiling's really low. That would make sense because it takes a lot of fuel to create energy and heat, and so they would keep they didn't do the high ceilings. And then you're like, where are all the rooms? There isn't. There's like a bed, and everyone got in the bed, and for the conservation of energy and heat and sources and things like that, they all crawl into the bed. Is that how they do it in your house, Robbie? Robbie's laughing. He's like, no! Oh my gosh! Could you like image purge, image purge, image purge? So here's the point. Write this down. Shh. Historically, you bring up the 9th Amendment. Historically, there's not that much of a history of privacy. There is definitely now. I mean, now, good grief. There is a lot of expectation, especially after, various different cases and so forth. But historically, not so much. Literally, once upon a time, the community said, we want to make sure that everyone in our community is in a fine moral upstanding, and they're behaving in all the ways that they should. Because if they're not, bad things will happen to the community. So therefore, it's everyone's business what is going on in everyone else's houses. Not just on the wedding date, but on all the other situations too. Oh my gosh, yeah. The poor couple, the poor community. Yes?
I can't find anywhere in here what amendment says.
It doesn't.
So
It's not. That's the point. There is no specific amendment that says right of privacy. And yet the Supreme Court says it's there. Let's get to it. Where is this right of privacy, birth control for married adults? Is it the 9th Amendment? Okay, we already talked about that one. I don't think so. I don't think historically it's quite there. Some people, you're like, is it a good idea? Are you okay with that? How many of you guys are like, it's okay that the government should be out of parenting decisions for adults as to whether or not they're going to have kids? Out of that, yeah, okay. But where is it? If you're going to say it's in the Constitution, where is it? Well, the answer is, here we go. The foregoing cases suggest that here we go. This is the decision written by Douglas, Justice Douglas. He was on the Supreme Court at the time. Earl Warren was the Chief Justice at the time. Foregoing cases suggest that a specific guarantees in the Bill of Rights, oh, here we go, Bill of Rights, 1 through 10, have penumbras. When was the last time you used that word? Penumbra? Never? Really? You even use sciencey people? Formed by emanations? From those guarantees that help give them life and substance. Various guarantees create zones of privacy. So we got emanations and penumbras that are used to help say there is a right of privacy. Oh, you want to know? Here we go. Take a look. It has to do with light and shadow. If you see a shadow, is that proof of a light?
Yeah.
Ah. If you see a shadow, is that proof of an object?
Yeah.
Yes. The light is being cast upon the object and creating a shadow. Therefore, the shadow helps prove the light as well as the object. Ah, I love that.
Some really weird analogy.
It's kind of a physics light. It's kind of like a Newtonian argument to be used in a constitutional manner. Critics would go, are you kidding me? That's legal analysis? They're like, I don't know, it worked. It got a majority. All right, so a penumbra is sort of like a reflected light off of. So if you're like doing doing portrait photography or so forth, they might have something here, and then they might put something up here to kind of create like a little like deflected light. You know what I'm saying? So a penumbra an emanation is a deflected light, and a penumbra is a deflected shadow. Right? So like if you're looking like down there, I see a shadow, but I also see kind of like funky little shadowy things. So it's like it's a secondary shadow. Again, you're like, what? Here we go. You ready? This is going to help you out a little bit better. The Supreme Court, in their decision, they said, all right, in the First Amendment, you have a right to assemble, associate, privately, with whoever you want to. Remember, we did a whole thing on that one? Right? So it sounds like, okay, so if you can choose to be with who you want to be with, and the government's supposed to butt out as long as it's peaceful, that's cool. So are the Griswolds kind of like associating with each other?
So it's kind of like
Yeah.
when you want to lie to someone and you have like part of the truth and
Well, it's sort of like the Supreme Court would say, this is just a logical extension of what's in there already. The Fourth Amendment maybe does the best job of this. The Fourth Amendment says the government can't come barging into your private dwelling and so forth without a warrant. Okay? Right? So there's that sense of, I'm in my private house, the government can't come in to search for criminal evidence. I think that's what they're getting at here. Do you see that? The Fourth Amendment, we want the government to stay out of like people's private dwellings and what goes on when they associate with other people. Does that kind of sort of make sense? Anyway, that's a legal argument, and who needs to buy it? Supreme Court.
just creating their reasoning out of little pieces of evidence.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like a scrapbook.
Sure. And if enough justices agree to that, that's the Supreme Court interpretation. And did the public go, oh my gosh, that's crazy? Not really. They're like, oh, that's a pretty good reason to get rid of a really old case or a really old law that's kind of like really outdated. But beware, because once you've created the Griswold case, the right of privacy, what could be the next step? Will that next step be as innocuous and easily accepted by the public, or will it be really controversial?
But they also use the argument that like the state gives the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So
That's Declaration of Independence.
But like it's probably still
The pursuit of happiness is what you're going on. Okay.
like that's
Yeah.
what they want to do.
I suppose, and you could kind of include that in there. I mean, because the Declaration of Independence is a very important document. Your best argument, obviously, is what's in the Constitution. And it is kind of funky because you do have this sort of like physics, light stuff. But ultimately, the Supreme Court's like, yeah, it's there. First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, mix it together. Yeah.
That's not a very good argument. You can't say we should ignore this law. It would make me happier if I could break the law. That lets a lot of weird people in.
Oh, we don't want to let weird people in, huh? Oh my gosh. No weird people. Here, actually, write this down. Shh, you ready? Soon after the Griswold case came up, some people came into the court and said, well, hey, what about those laws that prevent non-married people from having access to purchase birth control devices? And the Supreme Court actually said, no, we've spoken. We're not going to allow it for them. Okay? Doesn't necessarily apply now. I think that would be pretty much like thrown out. But in the early stages, it was fairly well confined. But it got curious because then it's going to be applied to another area that we're going to spend most of the rest of the period talking about. Okay, you ready? Yes, okay. So here's the deal, all right? Abortion, okay? Let's get the definition here. Females and males, they are born with different reproductive component parts. Yes? Yes, yes. Sometimes when the various reproductive component parts are intermingled and the location of the intermingling... What? Girls get pregnant? Boys get girls pregnant?
Well, yeah, we understand. There's a lot more.
Okay, so if you have a pregnancy, let's see how much you know. Ooh, we'll test and see how much you picked up on this. Kurt's like, don't ask me. Eyes avert. He's like, please, no. How many months does it take for a typical delivery after a pregnancy's occurred? You were not. 9 months. Pregnancy. 9 months. Okay, here we go. 9 months, all right? If certain things can happen in a pregnancy. You could have a miscarriage, okay? So pregnancy terminated through like natural circumstances and so forth. Okay, that's really sad. Particularly if a female is trying to go full on with the pregnancy and have a delivery of a healthy live child, okay, a baby. And trust me, when you get into the terms and so forth along here, it's kind of like, whoa, then you're going to get into all kinds of interesting things. Because what do you call you, when you were inside of yo mama, fetus, an unborn human? You were human. Once upon a time, you were like, fun size, with like little fun size wrapping. If, however, you can write this down. If, however, a female goes to see a person practiced in the art of medicine, surgery, to terminate a pregnancy, an unborn beep, 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 beep. Sometimes it's beep, 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 beep. Sometimes it's actually quite big, depending on the stage. That's called an abortion, okay? Now, here is something you need to know. In the United States of America, like with so many other laws, write this down. There were a lot of different laws in different states. Okay? Different laws in different states. In many states, having an abortion was illegal. Now, it did take place, and those are very dangerous circumstances, and the medical practitioners and so forth, and the females who were pregnant getting the abortion, could go through some pretty serious health risks. You know, the so-called coat hanger type abortion things, okay, that were taking place. So even though abortions were illegal in some states, they were still taking place outside of the regular care of medical procedures and so forth. But interesting thing, write this down. There was a trend taking place to a degree by 1973. 1973 was when the Roe versus Wade case came in. The trend started to open up some allowances for abortion, depending on circumstances and stage of pregnancy. I'll give you some examples because those come up quite a bit. So, for example, you could see here in some states like New York, Alaska, Hawaii, Washington, if this chart is to be believed that I picked up off the internet, legal upon request. Okay, so I don't know what all the details and so forth. I imagine there might have been some little bit more typical thing. And actually, this chart isn't very good and so forth. I would be curious because, like, if you go to Europe, if you were to go to Europe, you know, progressive Europe and so forth and so on, do females have the right to have an abortion? Pretty much everywhere. Although the timing is very critical. You can write this down. In many countries where there is a right to an abortion, the abortion is completely legal within the early stages of the pregnancy. And depending on what country you're in and so forth, it could be 12 weeks, it could be 16 weeks, it could be 20 weeks. Usually it doesn't get much beyond that. Okay, sometime within the first trimester. Okay? Sometimes, like you'll see here, they will give additional allowance for a female to have an abortion if certain circumstances kick in. Not much argument on the female's life is endangered. Okay? If the female's life is endangered by the continuation of the pregnancy, most places will allow for an abortion to take place. Although some females are like, I'm going to go with it. Okay? I have faith that it's going to work out with respect to the female's life as well as the life of the unborn child. But, nevertheless, it's up to them. Sometimes, in some states, they will give allowance for females to have more opportunity to have, more choice to have an abortion if the pregnancy occurred as a result of a rape. Okay? Okay, sometimes you hear rape and incest and so forth. Typically, like, if it's an incest that was forced upon a female, yeah, that's rape, yeah. So, rape. Okay? Health, that's a pretty interesting term because a female could go, I want to have an abortion, it's affecting my health, and the doctor agrees, so then you can have an abortion. Other people go, well, you mean like your life is in danger? No, health. I mean, health could be, depending on who you talk to, a very flexible thing, right? Is it in your best health interest to be here right now, or would you be in better health situation if you're at home in bed, sleeping, or playing on your favorite game, or reading a book? I need to go right now. It's for my health. Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, but it's interesting because I just not feeling so good. How many of you guys have, like, somebody evaluate your health and you're like, I'm not feeling good, Mom. And you're like, get out of bed now. And if you guys, okay, some of you guys are like, uh-huh. How many guys are like, and you got to stay home? Oh, there we go. Isn't that sweet? Okay? So, I mean, depending on who the person is evaluating it, who knows? Here we go. The case arose in Texas.
Case arose?
That wasn't that funny. Go ahead, quickly. Yeah, and it's like, I don't want to get into a whole big side thing and so forth on that one. Oh my gosh, yeah, okay. Texas had a law that was pretty much banning abortion, okay? Her name was Norma McCorvey. She is going to be Roe, okay? Because she wants to get an abortion, and she has an attorney, and her attorney comes up with a very novel approach legally to try and take that case all the way to the Supreme Court. They have to act fast because, pregnancies, you can't just wait a couple of years to get the court to take it on. And they did. And the argument was Texas is violating her right of privacy to control what happens to her body with respect to a pregnancy. Now, was that a constitutional right before Roe versus Wade? No, not in the U.S. Constitution. What case do you suppose they argued was applicable that should be expanded in its interpretation? Griswold. And her attorneys succeeded. She was known as Roe, like Jane Doe, Jane Roe, whatever. It's sort of like an anonymous name, because she didn't want everybody to know her name at the time. It's interesting because by the time I got this one, she had come out against the Roe versus Wade decision, although I've read subsequently that now she's come out in favor of the Roe versus Wade decision. So anyway, that's one person who has been on two sides. Yeah, that's her. Yeah. Her attorneys argued for and successfully got the Supreme Court to go along with a right of privacy. Females have the right to have an abortion. You got that? Therefore, the state cannot prevent it. Now, it's going to be fine-tuned. If you read the original Roe versus Wade, it looks like a state can't prevent an abortion at all in the first trimester, but may be able to prevent it in later trimesters. You understand that? Although, the practical, if you look at subsequent cases and look at that, here's the deal. The courts have said, the Supreme Court has said, the states cannot impair a female from getting an abortion if it impacts her health. Well, who determines the health of a female with respect to whether or not she can have an abortion or not? She and her doctor, okay? So in other words, put this down. as it's played out, females who are pregnant have basically in this country an unlimited right under the Constitution to have an abortion when they're pregnant. And it's not 24 months, it's not 12 months, it's somewhere up to 9 months or maybe a little bit later. Not much though. I think, a female is really, her health is really endangered if the pregnancy goes well beyond the expected 9 months. Because you're talking about, the mom's going to die. Okay? Do you understand that? This occurred in 1973. When the case came out, it was hot. Oh my gosh. And it still is. This case has been around for a long time. There are some very strongly felt opinions on this. Understand this. Very strong. Raise your hand if you're like, yeah, I kind of got a strong opinion about this case one way or another. Oh, who didn't have their hand up? Did you? Okay, you're like, and really, it's like, whoa. No. Are you sure you don't care about this issue? Okay, not at the moment. Okay. It's like, I don't want to answer no more questions. Mr. Holliday answered all those questions in Mr. Hanson's class. Leave me alone. Anyway, so here's the deal. This happened actually in 1973 during the presidency of Richard Nixon. And after that, people were like, oh my gosh, the Supreme Court just did they do what they did? And some people are going, woohoo! And other people are going, oh no! And so there's movement all around to figure out what to do. Could you get the Supreme Court to change its mind? Good luck with that. Oh, but here's the thing. The Supreme Court, if they do change their mind on that, what usually has to take place before the mind is changed? Different membership. Yeah. Different membership of the court. Yeah, that's where we're going on this one. This is why it's like, this is a very, very timely discussion on this issue. All right, let me take you through this. Subsequent to that, in pretty much every presidential election and a whole lot of congressional elections, especially for the Senate, because the Senate confirms or denies appointments to the Supreme Court, this has been an issue. I want to say every single president is elected all the way back to Reagan, and I think even Carter, the issue came up. It's been pretty clear what the president's view is on the abortion issue. They either like it or they don't like it. And when they claim their title as to what side they're on, they generally come down to this: pro-life, pro-choice. Although either side may refer to the other side by words that are not quite the same. I'll go through this real quick and then I'll call on you. Pro-life would be people who do not agree with the Roe versus Wade decision. They are pro-life of the fetus inside the womb. They think there should be much more protection so that life can occur and delivery can occur. Got that? So in other words, would they be in favor of more government restriction or less? More, yeah. Yeah, they want the majority of a community to decide, no, we can't have abortions, or these kinds of abortions, or after a certain time period and so forth. Okay? Pro-choice would say in favor of the female to have a choice with respect to her body and the condition of the pregnancy inside of her. Okay? They want her to have the choice. Okay, so they want her to have more freedom. They would refer to these guys over there as anti-choice. And the pro-lifetime people sometimes refer to the pro-choice people as pro-death or something like that. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. How many of you guys have ever had a discussion on the abortion with somebody that was fair and calm and guided? How many of you guys have ever had a discussion with somebody where it didn't meet those terms? All right, fair enough. This is America. Hello. My goal in here is to provide with you the background of the legal circumstances and some of the parameters and so forth. And then by the time we get to, I want to do a poll and see which group you would fit yourself into by Mr. Hanson's definitions: logical pro-choice, practical pro-life, logical pro-life, because those two actually can be bifurcated at least into several different subparts. But we'll get to that here in a moment. One thing that's kind of interesting, just in case you didn't know, here, take a look up here. Okay, look up here. There's two things going on here. Now, don't be confused by this. This is not going to be that big. Okay, so, I mean, just perspective. It's a perspective. Although that's actually pretty close to, I don't know. So our pregnancy starts out, there she is. She's pregnant. Can you tell?
No. The answer is always no.
What about here? Nope. That was perfect. Nope. So first trimester, not showing much. Second trimester, third trimester, birth. Okay, there we go. And you can see, there's the trimesters and so forth. They do it in weeks here. There's different development as far as the fetus. Okay? Now this is interesting. Go ahead and write this down. Because one of the key points that Roe versus Wade tried to identify was the point of viability. Write that down. Viability, as in, things change in the pregnancy as far as how decisions can be made and whether the government can intervene, maybe, or maybe not ultimately, at the point of viability. Definition, the fetus can sustain life outside the womb. Do you understand that? In other words, if a child is born prematurely before the full 9 months and they can live outside the womb, maybe they need some additional care in the hospital and so forth, the Supreme Court said, well, we kind of look at that a little bit differently, and yeah, we should look at that differently because the viability, you really can survive. Just to be clear on this, hang on just a sec. Just to be clear on this, because I did tell you, if a female is pregnant and is in the 9th month, can a state prevent her from having an abortion? No, because she could say, it's my health, my doctor agrees with me, she'd be on the way to an abortion clinic. Doesn't happen a lot, maybe a few thousand times a year in this country. But nevertheless, it does. Late stage abortion. Yeah, most of them are very early on. You got tens of thousands occurring early on in this country. Yeah. But it is interesting because the legal status of a female, legal status, listen very carefully, legal status of a female, 9 months pregnant, going to, sorry, I don't mean to be rude or anything, walking daintily to the abortion clinic. When they go into the abortion clinic, is that fetus viable? Yes, could it sustain itself outside the womb? Yeah, it's like right here. Yeah, 9 months, yeah. So here's the deal. If she goes into the abortion clinic, has an abortion, has she violated the law? No, okay? And she can't be stopped. She can have it. The doctor's in agreement. It's for her health and so forth. What if, in the parking lot, she gives birth? Is there a legal status change with respect to that which was previously inside of her? Yes. What is the legal status change? It's a baby. It is a human. They have a right to due process. Yeah, life, liberty, and so forth. And so if you're like, well, I intended for you not to continue, boom, that would be a homicide. Does that make sense? So it's a really interesting thing because if you get into the late stage, you're talking about some fine distinctions. Question?
I was just wondering, because he pro-choice pro-parental, was that part of his campaign?
Yes.
Was that,
Yes.
Was that,
Yes. That was part of his.
or she?
Actually, both. That particular poster comes from his. She's pro-choice, too. Yeah, I mean, it's like if you go back through all the Democratic candidates running for president, and you can write that down if you didn't know it already, Democrat candidates running for president going back into at least the 80s, and I want to say even the late 70s, pro-choice. The Democratic Party is very pro-choice. The Republican Party is very pro-life. All the Republican candidates, in fact, when we get to Reagan, it'll be interesting. Because Reagan appoints somebody to the Supreme Court and he's like, oh, I've just appointed a pro-life justice. That's what you thought. Okay? There we go. There, almost there, there. Yeah, what did you like? Yeah, oh, here. You can put this down. Reagan's first nominee to the Supreme Court, write her name down, Sandra Day O'Connor. First female justice to the Supreme Court. Reagan thought, oh, she'll be great. I really like her. She's an awesome jurist. She's really smart. And some of his advisors are like, you shouldn't choose her. I think she's going to end up like voting pro-choice if an abortion issue comes up. And he's like, I think it'll be all right. Turns out, she wrote the decision in a 5-4 decision reaffirming Roe versus Wade. You can write that down. The name of the case is Casey versus Planned Parenthood. We'll get into some of the details there. But on its essence, Casey versus Planned Parenthood, 1992, is a reaffirmation of Roe versus Wade. Reagan's choice disappointed him. What could he do about it? Nothing. Once you get on the Supreme Court, you're on the Supreme Court.
I would love to see his face, so when they like came in and just told the president what the decision was
Yeah.
on that, and just like the sheer look of like, just the shame.
So, just in case you don't know, this is, and I was looking for something that was like, in case you just don't know, I mean, this is, obviously we're skipping the procreative parts. Oh, never mind, they do have some here. Okay, think of it as like a Star Wars movie or something. Pew, pew. Use the Force, Luke. Use the Force. All right.
See, that's the Death Star.
There was a Death Star, okay? Hey, look, all y'all were here once upon a time. I'm pretty sure of it. Unless you're some kind of alien or something. I don't know. Oh, should we listen to the pleasant music? I think this is from like, as I recall, this is from like a obstetric clinic, you know, doctors for babies and mommies and stuff. So there you are. I don't know, which of your classmates does this most resemble? Is that right? 11. They were starting to get up. Beep, 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 beep. Be careful when they get pretty far along because they're going to take their finger and they look at the camera and they're like, anyway, just saying. They're going to be doing symbols. Peace, that's what I'm saying, peace. Okay, 15. And actually, I think you can probably find even better ones because ultrasound technology is even better now as far as getting. This just looks like a bronze golden baby thing. Yeah. Have you ever seen a picture of yourself in utero? Have you? My wife and I were like, don't show us the private parts. We want to be surprised. So we were surprised with the birth of my son, and our daughter. We didn't peek. How many of you guys are going to peek if that ever gets to the point? So you know, I'm going to get a bunch of clothes from this, or I'm going to get a bunch of clothes from that. Okay, 25. Some people suck their thumb. Others, toes. Okay? And if you got twins, how many are in there? Twins are 2. Your sibling is a womb mate. Eyes open. Are we getting closer? How many weeks does it take for traditional? 40. There we go. Bada bing, bada bing, bada bing. Okay. I think the kid needs a keyboard in there. Yeah, it's like 34. A lot of sleeping going on. That'll change. Then they'll stay awake, and then they'll become teenagers and try and sleep at every instance that they possibly can. And babies? And chillins, like the chillins. We're getting closer. It's getting closer. So obviously the pro-life constituency is like, this is kind of, pro-life would refer to life in utero up as a bye-bye. It's a bye-bye. There you go. That's right. That's a bye-bye. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So, one of the things, write this down. Shh. let's go through some of the parameters, because as the Roe versus Wade, here we go, the parameters. I'm trying to teach here. What do you want to know?
You have to pay to hold your baby.
There's a fee where you have to pay to hold your baby.
Yeah.
I'm not. It's like a $40 fee. I didn't know it was gonna make me so upset. I'm so upset.
Not when I was born. Anyway, so here we go. Obviously, as you went through this, okay, ladies and gentlemen, different states were looking at it in different ways and so forth. And the Supreme Court ultimately is going to look at different kind of circumstances. You ready? Write this down. One of the things that the pro-life community has been very active in doing is trying to create various, if not a reversal, which has not taken place, boundaries or parameters limiting the right to have an abortion and therefore limiting, arguably, the number of abortions taking place. You understand that? Okay? So, and that was what came up in the Casey versus Planned Parenthood case. Ultimately, the key thing you need to take away there is it's a much closer decision, 5-4. And most of the recent decisions on the abortion issue have been 5-4. But the last person who was involved in the 5-4 decision reaffirming Roe versus Wade is no longer on the court. Her name's Sandra Day O'Connor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Yeah, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Okay? And so there is a change there. Okay? Oh, let me get to that in just a sec. Let me go through the litany of different kinds of things that are relevant to the issue of abortion. Okay, 1. Can a state require parental consent if the female is underage? You can write that down. Okay? Can a state require parental consent for that surgical procedure, the abortion, if a female is under 18? The Supreme Court said no. Okay? Now, it's interesting because if you are going to if a female or any person is going to have some kind of a surgical procedure under the age of 18, you do need parental consent. Okay? The Supreme Court, in its analysis, said that would be too much of a limitation on a female's right to have an abortion because then that would give her parent the ability to veto her decision. Got that? So if a female gets pregnant, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years of age, they do not have to get a parental consent. Now let me just clarify this. The only states that have been able to allow parental consent is if there's a Part B, and the Part B is guaranteed. In other words, I think Pennsylvania has this. You either get your parent to consent, but if your parents aren't going to consent and they can't veto, you go to a judge. And the judge will look at you and take you through the proper paperwork, and then the judge goes, check. The judge can't say no either. Do you understand that? In other words, the Supreme Court said that's too much of a limitation on the female to have the abortion by requiring a parent to sign off on it, and the judge can't say no either.
There's still some things though, like most of the time when people who are under the age of 18 go through medical procedures, usually they're not the ones paying for it.
Oh, yeah. No, if it's under 18, lots of states have things where the parents have to sign off this, that, and so forth. I mean, trust me, when you guys turn 18 and so forth, it's going to be like a whole nother thing, right? Even the school has to get permission from you if information is going to be going to parents and so forth. Because when you're 18, all of a sudden, boo, you just had an 18th birthday and you're a genius. You're super responsible. Whatever. Anyway, magic happens. Yeah, anyway. But I mean, it's a bright line rule. How about this one? Some states want females to really think about the abortion thing. It's a big, big thing. They want them to think about it and so forth, right? Consider, write this down, adoption as an opportunity rather than termination through abortion. Okay? Can a state say, is it too much of a burden on a pregnancy, for a female to have a pregnancy or an abortion, to have the state say, well, at least we want to provide some brochures you can look at before you can go on and have the abortion? Well, the answer is no, it's not too much, but it has to be fairly small. You got that? The Supreme Court has said, yeah, you can have some of that. Some of the information about, information about abortion, information about adoptions and other alternatives. Here's another one. A delay. Write this down. A delay. Can a state say, All right, female that wants to go in for an abortion, we're going to delay it a day so you can think about it, so you're not making a really